Welcome to part 4 of your notes. This is over ecosystems. We are going to cover these learning targets. One, we've covered in all the other units or all the other parts of notes as well. It's just this is another level of organization higher than the community. Next one is ecosystem. So we're going to talk about ecosystem. 13, illustrate and describe the flows of energy in a food web. Predict how the flow of energy will change due to changes in the flow web. So we're going to talk about how energy relates to food. 15, describe how primary productivity affects the number and the size of trophic levels. 16, describe the role of keystone predator and how an ecosystem can change if it is removed. Okay, and then lastly, the role of disturbances and successions in ecosystems. Okay, so first I guess we need to really cover what is an ecosystem. That is just simply the interaction of biotic and abiotic factors acting together as a system. So keep in mind that biotic means living. Okay, so biotic factors are going to be things like all these, let me see if I can get the pin, all the living creatures that you can find. So while I'm trying to figure out the pin, see if you can find any living creatures, like, dang it. Maybe the pin's not going to work for me today. Yep, no pin. Okay, so those would be things like the seabirds, marine mammals, fish, all those kinds of things are going to be biotic factors. They are not by any means the only biotic factors in this ecosystem. However, they are some. And then abiotic factors are going to be things like the Alaska coastal current, the precipitation that you find up here. Oh, look, it's working now. Okay, so these are abiotic factors. Okay, non-living. Now we're going to kind of bring it back to part 3 of our notes with successions. Okay, so succession, if you remember, usually we're talking about plant material, and we have primary succession, that's on bare rocks, places where there hasn't been life, and then there is secondary succession. Okay, we see secondary succession a lot more common than we see primary succession because we have these disturbances, these abiotic disturbances like forest fire or hurricane or tornado or earthquake or something like this. We have these abiotic factors that disturb the ecosystem. Okay, now if you're a community of plants, you've got to be able to kind of bounce back from that, and that's why we have that's why we're having a discussion about disturbances. Is it good? Is it bad? Well, it really depends on what plants we're talking about. So, for example, forest fires, this picture that I have up here, are a very natural part of the west part of the coast. Even fires sweeping across the plains were very natural. If you actually drive across the country, it's interesting now, what used to be plains or just lots of grass, you're seeing more and more shrubs and small trees that are popping up along Nebraska or Wyoming, just because there aren't these fires going to wipe it out and bring it back down to this grass. So it's good and bad depending on what kind of animal you're in, or what kind of animal you're at. If you're an animal that requires trees and you have a forest fire, that's a really bad thing. If you're an animal that requires grass and your grass gets overtaken by these trees, then once the grass starts to grow again because of a disturbance, that's a good thing. Okay, like I was saying, the pine trees. Okay, so there are certain pine trees that have evolved because fires are a frequent part of nature in certain places of the country. They've evolved to need 180 degrees or 200, I think, degrees Fahrenheit for the pine cones to open up and to release the seeds that are inside of them. Okay, so what we've done is, as humans, we don't like fire, especially if it's close to our homes. We want to protect our homes, which is a completely valid concern. So what we've done is anytime we see a fire, when we see a fire, we want to put it out. And so we have firefighters and really expensive equipment that goes and dumps lots of water or fire suppressant stuff on the fire and puts it out, which is, great if we're protecting our homes. But what we've seen over the long run is that we're getting this buildup of tinder or small branches and leaves that are going to light a lot easier. And since we have this buildup, when we have a fire now, it's a much bigger problem than it used to be, because it burns faster because there's all this tinder on the ground, and it usually burns hotter, okay, which takes the community or the ecosystem longer to recuperate if it's burning hotter than it has evolved in the past to cope with. Okay, so if you're interested, you should look up fire ecology, because there is actually controlled burns that go on now to try to eliminate the litter. There are all sorts of programs that we're trying to do to kind of fix that. Okay, so energy flow. The sun obviously is going to be the source of all energy. Okay, the sun is going to give producers or autotrophs the energy because they're going to go through photosynthesis. Now, autotrophs can also go through chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis, they're going to get their energy from some kind of chemical. Then there's heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers. They are things like herbivores. Those are your primary consumers. Herbivores eat plants. There's carnivores, that's secondary and up. And then there are omnivores, and omnivores eat producers, plants, and they also eat consumers. Okay, then we have detrivores. These break down big things. These would be things like roly-polies, insects that are going to break down big stuff, like big logs. Then there's decomposers. They're going to break it down into the little, like, atomic molecule kind of level. Things like fungus, which tastes disgusting. Okay, now when we talk about food chains, energy levels, okay, the primary producers down here are going to be getting their energy from the sun, and they're going to pass a portion of that energy onto the primary consumers, the things that are eating the plants. Okay, not all the energy is going to get passed on. Some of it's going to get lost to heat or just the energy that's required for life. And then we have our secondary consumers. They're going to get even less of the energy, and I can't draw my boxes any smaller without cutting the fish off, so sorry. We're going to have our tertiary consumers. They're going to get even less energy, and then we're finally going to get our quaternary consumers, which are going to get the least amount of energy, which is why in any ecosystem you're going to see far less consumers, the top level consumers, than you are the producers. So let's say in an ecosystem we have one carnivore, one hawk. This is a red-tailed hawk, by the way. One hawk, and we have 10 snakes, and for 10 snakes we have 100 of these little mice, and for every 100 little mice, or for in this ecosystem we'll have then 1,000 bugs that the mice are going to eat, are primary consumers, and then we'll have 10,000 plants. Okay, now you'll see these numbers like this because not all the energy is getting passed to each level. You only get 10% of the energy to the next level, which is why these guys, they have to eat a whole lot more than the insects down here. Okay, now food chains, we have trophic levels. That's kind of what I was just sharing with you. Trophic levels, this is how energy moves within an ecosystem. The flow is directional. So in other words, this mouse eating the corn here is giving energy to this cat when the cat eats it. Okay, the cat is not giving any energy to the mouse. It's just flowing from the mouse to the cat. Okay, and then as the cat dies, decomposed energy flows that way, and then that way, and that way. Okay, so take notice here, the point of those arrows, that's the direction that energy flows. Okay, so now we need to move on to food webs. Food webs are a little bit more complicated because they're showing all of the feeding relationships in the network. The arrows still are going just one direction, and that direction still is that flow of energy. Okay, so I mean, I know you guys know this stuff, so if you need help, come talk to me in class, but otherwise, we're moving on. Okay, next we have trophic relationships pyramids. This is kind of what I was trying to show you before on that food chain when I was drawing it. Okay, energy pyramids, the amount of available energy at each trophic level. Okay, that's what we're dealing with when we're doing pyramids. Okay, there's only 10% of the energy that's available to be passed on to the next level. Okay, and it's typically no more than 2 to 3 levels just because that energy is going to quickly run out. Biomass pyramid, this is when you have a pyramid set up of the total biomass of an organism at each trophic level. Biomass, bio mean living, mass being mass. So you're going to see something very similar to your primary consumers. They're going to have more biomass than your secondary consumers, and your secondary consumers are going to have more mass than your tertiary if you have tertiary. And then numbers pyramids, this is just taking a look at how many organisms we have, the numbers of organisms at each trophic level, and sometimes these are inverted, like here, you can see there. We're not going to really go too much into that. Just be aware that sometimes number pyramids can be inverted. Okay, keystone species, this is our last slide. Keystone species, this is the impact on a community, or this is a species that the impact on the community is going to be greater than their abundance would indicate. So things like your here, this little river otter, or think of like a beaver. A beaver is a really great example of a keystone species because it builds a dam, and since it builds a dam, it kind of creates this little reservoir. Now that reservoir provides habitats for fish, for waterfowl, for things that eat the waterfowl. But there's not going to be, that's only one beaver that's built that dam, or 2 that live in there. So you would think by those numbers it wouldn't be that important. However, if you take out the beaver, it's no longer maintaining the dam. The dam's going to break down and you're going to lose that reservoir of water. So the fish are going to lose their habitat, the waterfowl are going to lose their habitat, and everything that eats the habitat. Okay, we also did the Kaibab Plateau with the wolves, and you learned that by taking out, well, actually it was cougars, but the same principle applies with the wolves. You take out that keystone species, then you're going to have a much bigger effect than you would think. Okay, it occupies the niche that holds the rest of the community in place, so it's kind of like the linchpin. And that is it. So, thank you for doing your notes.